that tells you that there is something out there.
Pretty hard to spoof that.
Absolutely. Los Alamos, Oak Ridge National Labs, MacDill Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base, the remote test site in Nevada, also known as Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3. That's the actual terminology for Groom Lake facility.
From what I hear you guys saying, there's something.
I don't know who's building it, who's got the technology, who's got the brains, but there's something out there that better than our airplane.
So it's not us, that's one thing we know.
We know that.
I could say that with a very high degree of confidence.
For someone to try to bust down the walls, it's not going to happen. You'd have to go to all these facilities, get into their vaults, then bring that out as a united coalition. Not one person couldn't do it. It would take a united coalition of acknowledged scientists to come forward with it.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again for taking the time to meet with me. I really do appreciate it. I've been reading the comments and we're really getting some good feedback here. I really appreciate that. And please subscribe to this channel if you value the research that we're doing here, and we're maintaining an important part of our national history. So thanks again for the support. Now, I've prepared at least 5 additional cases. I want to get right into them. We'll be talking about some Autobinder cases. We'll be getting a little bit into the 1897 mystery airship wave as well, but I want to start tonight, and we're going to go ahead and discuss the Westall 66 case. This is known all around the world. It's very famous. This is another one of these strange playground UFO encounters that Preston Dunnett has done a really good job archiving these. So this is April 6, 1966, Westall High School, Melbourne, Australia. And we'll begin to set the scene here. Now, originally, it was a small group of students that saw a flying saucer above the high school. Now, there were some aircraft that were circling this thing, so they saw it as well. So originally, we've got a small group of students that saw this, and then we know that there were pilots involved. They were circling this. So there's no question that we had multiple eyewitnesses. Now, the source for this is Dandenong Journal, April 14th, 1966. That's the date here. And we'll move on to the next slide. Now, the next thing that happened is that small group that originally saw the saucer, they went inside the school and they alerted the other students. Now, nothing happened for just a little bit of time, but when the recess bell went out, all of these students came pouring out of this school. Literally 200 students came out of it, and they saw this dish-shaped craft. There were at least 3 faculty members that saw this as well. So we've got the students and the faculty member. In point of fact, at least one faculty member took multiple photographs of this craft. Just incredible. That camera and film was confiscated later on. Now, we have an additional eyewitness that had no connection to the school whatsoever, and what he described are 2 dish-shaped craft that landed at his location. They were about 16 feet in diameter. They had a dark dome-shaped section on the top, as you can see here in this illustration. Now, one of these craft, at the very least, one of these craft landed in something called the Grange, which is associated with the location of the high school. And there was a small group of students that broke away from the main group, and they started going into this wooded area called the Grange. And we'll go ahead and move forward here to give you an idea of what that looked like. So here's one of the students. Now, she got very close to this. She had a very close encounter. In fact, being curious as students are, I'm willing to bet that she actually touched this. I can't confirm it. We don't know for sure, but she got there because she was a fast runner. She got there and arrived before the other students could catch up with her. She saw this thing there. I believe she touched it. I really do. She was traumatized by the incident. She ended up having to be carried away in an ambulance, and basically she was never seen again. Although when this craft took off, which was seen by the other people who caught up to this, it left this burnt mark circular area on the ground. So it's at least a CE2 case because it had physical effects. So this is known as the Westall 66 case. We'll move on to the next case now. And we'll consider these Autobinder reports. Again, these were published between 1965 and 1969. And Basically, this was a weekly newspaper column where sighting reports were brought in. We'll go ahead and do the first read over on the original case, and then we'll go to the color illustration. So we'll start right here. October 12th, 1796. On Columbus Day, over 170 years ago, Canadian observers reported an astonishing fleet of airships, UFOs, with portholes and visible occupants sailing over the Bay of Fundy from the Pacific Stars and Stripes. So that's the source for this. So, ladies and gentlemen, 1796, that predates everything we know about ufology. Everything we know about modern day ufology, it predates all of that. Here's the drawing illustration done by Tom Bogan. We've colorized it here to give you a good look at it, but let's just go back and think 1796. Who could be flying these? Who is building these? Are they interdimensional? Are they a pre-existing high-tech civilization that's already been on this planet for thousands of years that already figured out this technology? Those are the questions we were going to ask as we continue with this series. Let's move on to the next one here. July 1868, villagers in Campeche, Chile were frightened by a giant armor-plated machine covered with steel scales whose twin searchlight eyes stabbed down brilliantly. This even predates the 1897 mystery airship wave. So again, who is building these craft that have some type of power source where they could have these beaming spotlights, very high-powered spotlights, shining down on the towns below? So let's move ahead to the next slide. We'll give you the colorized version of what this looks like now. And here is our version here by Tom Bogan. Can you imagine this flying over a town in 1868 with beaming spotlights coming down? Where is the power source for this? Where are they getting this from? Let's move on to the next slide here, and we'll dig a little bit deeper here. So just to give you an idea, these are typically the type of newspaper clippings from 1896 to 1897. This is what people are reporting. And we'll look at just a couple of them here. That airship now at Chicago. So they saw it there. Here's one, that letter to Edison. There were a lot of people who thought that this was a top secret project by Thomas Edison. He denied any involvement in it whatsoever. So apparently he wasn't involved. So we'll move on to the next slide now. And just break down what some of these newspaper clippings are saying here. Number one, locals reported that letters were being dropped from the airships. Can you imagine? You see something flying over and then it drops a letter. Next thing. These were allegedly to have been written by a mysterious inventor. One note said, and this is interesting, one note said that the craft would revolutionize all present methods of locomotion. What is this person talking about with these letters? And what is this revolutionary way of transportation? Very interesting. Many believe that Thomas Edison was the secret inventor, but he always denied it. Next, there were many reports of airships landing for repairs. So, folks, does this sound like something that is extraterrestrial, that's 100 million light years advanced in our technology, yet they're constantly landing for repairs? This sounds like a much more terrestrial technology. Next one. On 5 separate occasions, eyewitnesses who saw the craft land claimed they spoke to a man named Wilson, who is described as not as an alien being, but as a mortal human, basically is what they described. So he was a mortal human. We'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, so flight of the Yankee bombing ship, Dr. Solomon Andrews was sure he had the design for America's first bomber, which could be used to turn back the tide of Confederate victory. So the source for this is True UFOs #2, summer 1981. So you can see that even during this time frame of the Civil War, they already had ideas for this concept. They had different planforms being built. Now, this is the Arion by Dr. Solomon Andrews, and we'll talk about who this person was and what kind of a genius he was in the next slide here. This is a schematic drawing of what he described, and he had a test flight. This is period of time frame, 1863 was the first time frame. Now, he did build an earlier one right around 1849 time frame, but it was the second version one that we're going to focus on here. This is test flown back in 1863. We'll move on to the next slide. Yeah, we'll move forward. That's fine. Yep. Okay, so as far back as the Civil War, this Arion airship air power is being thought about as early as the Civil War. That's how back we can go back in time. So if this is the Civil War time, then they had at least a couple of decades, right, to perfect the technology until 1897 mystery airship wave came on the scene. So at least we've got some time frame here to really prove these designs out. And if they were in conjunction with the Sonora Aero Club, then you can see that, yes, they could have done it. So we'll move on to the next slide here, and we'll dig a little bit deeper here. So here is Dr. Solomon Andrews. He was an inventor. Some of the things that he did was a sewing machine. He was involved in a gas light, and he had many other inventions. He was a genius. He was an absolute genius. We'll move on to the next slide now. Okay, so President Abraham Lincoln was personally briefed on this particular craft. However, due to bureaucratic red tape, he was never allowed to see the actual witness reports and letters from the flight test. So that's as far as it got. So even back then, there was all this red tape. So bottom line is, he was personally briefed on this craft, but the letters never got to him. So there was just red tape even back then. And we'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, we're going to continue with some of our Autobinder cases now. January 20th, 1951, near Sioux City, Iowa, a huge cigar-shaped UFO zoomed straight at an airliner, then incredibly made a sharp hairpin turn and sped back the way it came, all in short seconds. So how many times have we heard about these large 200 to 300 foot long cigar-shaped craft making these hairpin turns, these 90-degree right angle turns? Sometimes these things are going thousands of miles an hour back in 1950s. Who's got the technology? What's the propulsion system? How did they make the breakthrough? Those are the questions we're going to ask. Let's move on to the colorized version here. And you can see what this looks like. Very well done. Again, this is the same type illustration, but you see the 4-engine prop liner here as we're continuing these cases, and we're just bringing an important part of our national history out so that the public can see it in the form of color illustrations. We'll move on to the next slide now. Okay, December 21st, 1964. This is a good one. Fishersville, Virginia, while driving, Horace Byrne saw a giant UFO shaped like a beehive with a dome on top, measuring 125 feet in diameter and 80 to 90 feet high. He saw it land for a while, then flew away. Can you imagine driving down the road and seeing this beehive UFO, something like 90 to 120 feet in diameter, land near your location? Let's move on to the next slide here. We'll show you the colorized version just to get an idea of what this looks like. Now, here's the newspaper clipping. The Daily News Leader, October 3rd, 2016, did kind of an article on different configurations. But if you look over to the left, everybody, you can see the vehicle down on this Route 250. So that's the scale here. And then over to the right, you've got this huge beehive UFO. It's 125 feet in diameter, 80 feet high, dwarfing the car. An incredible sighting, at least documented. All right, we'll move on to the next slide, and you can see the colorized version here. As he's driving down the car, this thing flies over him and lands. Incredible, just incredible. And again, we're just maintaining an important part of our national history now. We'll move on to the next case here. Okay, interesting. October 26, 1966, 5 p.m., as reported by Miss C. Parks of Fort Wayne, Indiana, a strange football hovered over a newspaper plant whose stacking machinery went temporarily out of order as an EM effect, electromagnetic ray, came from the UFO. So in this case, it is a CE2 because it had physical effects. It actually stopped the printing press. So if we move now to the next slide, we'll show you what this thing looked like. So there must have been some interesting consequences of when this thing stopped the press. I mean, they could have lost thousands of dollars. So there definitely must have been some interesting conversations when this thing flew over this particular printing press. We'll move on to the next case now. Now, after looking at all these cases for decades now, I have never heard of a skull-shaped UFO. I think this is unprecedented. This is a one-off. I haven't personally heard of any other ones that look like this, but we'll talk about this one here. May 6, 1968, 10:30 p.m., camping out with a friend, Joseph Plazo of Elwira, Ohio, saw an amazing skull-shaped UFO surrounded by flames, which flashed down an intense searchlight beam for, and I don't quite see the bottom there, but you can see what this thing looks like. I have never seen a UFO shaped like this. And if we move forward, we'll go ahead and show you the colorized version. I'd like to hear of anyone who saw anything like this, but I think it's unprecedented. It wasn't very large in size, but multiple eyewitnesses, at least in this particular case, have seen this for sure. So that's what we've prepared for today. We're going to continue to maintain an important part of our national history. We're going to be going live very soon on these. And again, I want to thank you for your support. Thank you for the kind comments and the feedback. And we'll move on to our next case with our next episode coming up very soon. So thanks for your attention.